Chapter 21 of The Brand of Silence. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Roger Moline. The Brand of Silence by Harrington Strong. Chapter 21. Recognition. Through a maze of crossing and winding roads the car made its way, now over highways as smooth as city pavement, and now over rough mileage that jolted the occupants and threatened the springs with destruction. Jim Farland did not recognize this particular district. He did not even know upon which side of the river he was being hauled along as a prisoner. In the city proper, his abductors would have found it very difficult to take him to a section where he could not have recognized some sort of a landmark, but here they had him at a serious disadvantage. The night was dark, too, and a fine drizzle was falling. Farland tugged at his bonds when he could, and finally convinced himself that they would not give. He tried to work one end of the gag from the corner of his mouth, and found that he could not do that. He was utterly helpless for the time being, at the mercy of the three men who had kidnapped him, and the chauffeur, and whoever might be where they were going. For half an hour longer the car made its way across the country, and then Farland noticed that it left the principal thoroughfare and turned into a rough, narrow lane that was bordered with big trees. At the end of a quarter of a mile of this lane the chauffeur brought the car to a stop. Farland could see a building that had the appearance of being an abandoned farmhouse. He was lifted from the car and carried to the door. One of the men threw it open and Farland was carried inside. They took him through a hall, turned into a room, and tossed him upon a couch in a corner there. One of them struck a match, lighted a lamp, and then they turned to survey him. Farland glared at them, waiting for them to speak. They were making no attempt to hide their features. Typical thugs they were, the three of them, and Farland supposed that the chauffeur, who had not come into the house with the others, belonged to the same class. One of them stepped forward and removed Farland's gag, while another went into another room and presently returned with a dipper of water, which he held to Farland's lips. He drank greedily, for the gag had parched his mouth and throat. "Bein' as how you're a copper, I'd slip a knife between your ribs and call it a good job," one of the men told him. "But we are supposed to treat you nice and keep you in condition for a little talk with the boss. So you needn't tremble with fear any." "It'd take more than three bums like you to make me afraid," Farland told him. "Nasty, ain't you? Maybe we'll get a little chance to beat you up later, especially if your little talk with the boss ain't what they call productive of results. You've got some reputation as a dick, but I reckon it's all a fake. We didn't have much trouble getting you and bringing you here." "Isn't that enough to make you worry a bit?" Farland asked. "How do you mean?" "Did you ever stop to think that maybe I wanted to be captured and hauled here? Have you any idea how many men watched and trailed us? You've led me to where I wanted to come, to a place I wanted to find, perhaps." "That bluff won't work," came the reply. "We had a couple of men watching for that very thing, and they'd have given us a high sign if we had been followed. You're here all by your lonesome, and so you'd better be good." Two of the men left the room, and the third sat down by the table to act as guard. 15 minutes passed, during which Jim Farland and the man by the table exchanged pleasant remarks concerning each other, neither getting much the best of the argument. Then the hall door was opened again, and a masked man entered the room. Remembering what Murk had related to him concerning his experience of the night before, Jim Farland looked up at this newcomer with sudden interest. This man undoubtedly was a sort of leader, one who had hired others to help him in his work, and who knew the identities of Sidney Prale's mysterious enemies, and why they were working against him. Perhaps, also, the man who could tell a good deal about the murder of Rufus Shepley. Farland did not betray too much interest, though, for he sensed that he was opposed to a person of brains and cunning. a different type from the thugs he hired to work for him. So the detective merely blinked his eyes rapidly as he looked up at the other and waited for him to speak. "You are Jim Farland, a detective?" The voice was low and harsh, a monotone, a disguised voice in fact. Jim Farland knew that at once. "That's my name, and some people are kind enough to say that I am a detective," Farland replied. "What's the idea of treating me rough like this?" "I regret that violence was necessary to get you here, Mr. Farland," the masked man replied. "But it seemed to be the only way in which I could get a chance to talk to you freely without subjecting myself to danger." "Why regret?" Farland asked. "Because I want you for my friend instead of my enemy, Mr. Farland, and I fancy that we may be able to come to terms. I shall send this man of mine from the room and submit a proposition to you. I hope you see fit to accept it." He motioned for the other man to leave, which he did immediately, closing the hall door behind him. Then the masked man sat down in the chair by the table. Farland was watching him closely now. The collar of his coat and the handkerchief mask effectually shielded his face and head. But, as Murk had told, this man did not have the common sense to cover his hands, and Farland looked at them when he could, careful not to let the other suspect his object. "I am the man who talked to Mr. Prale's valet last night," Farland heard the other say. "In some manner the valet escaped, and so we were obliged to have you brought here instead of to the place where we had him, and which was considerably nearer the city. I regret it if the long ride annoyed you, but you will appreciate that it was necessary for my men to bind and gag you." "It certainly was if they expected to get me here," Jim Farland declared. He heard the masked man chuckle. "I understand that you have been engaged by Sidney Prale to clear him of the charge of murdering Rufus Shepley." "I don't mind admitting that, since the whole city knows it," said Farland. "And also to aid Sidney Prale in outwitting certain persons who are trying to punish him for something he did?" "I don't know anything about that. I do know that some people are trying to make things hot for Sid Prale, and he doesn't deserve it, and—" "Pardon me if I interrupt," the masked man said. "You say that he does not deserve it. Do you believe that influential persons would persecute him if he did not deserve it?" "Sid Prale doesn't know what it is all about." "That is what he told the valet, too. But believe me when I say that he does know what it is all about, and is deceiving you when he says otherwise." "What has all this to do with me?" Jim Farland demanded. "Did you have me brought here to argue the case with me?" "I had you brought here because I want you to cease working for Sidney Prale. I want you to go back to him and tell him that you are done." "As Coadley, the attorney, did?" "Exactly." "Your people must be men of influence if they can buy off Coadley like that." "Perhaps Coadley was shown that it would wreck his future if he continued working for Prale." "Well, you can't wreck my future, because I haven't any," Farland told him. "Do not be too sure of that, Mr. Farland. Agree to my proposition, and you may have a great future. You may find business thrown your way. You may find yourself able to spread out, have a protective service, become a wealthy man. If you give up the Prale case, we'll see that you are paid cash immediately, of course, in lieu of the fee you would receive from Prale, and considerably more than he would pay you." "I suppose that would appeal to a lot of men," Jim Farland said. "But it isn't the right bait to use if you are eager to catch me. I have all the business I want. I can make a living for myself and my small family, and we do not hanker after riches. A larger business would make me a human machine, and I'd rather just drift along and be an ordinary good husband and father. I'd rather be running a little